Alright guys, how's it going? Welcome back. I've been spending a lot of time recently driving convertibles, and it's fair to say I'm hooked. I recently bought a Porsche 718 Boxster, and I just love it. You can drop the roof or raise the roof in 10 seconds, so you can exploit every 5 minutes of sunshine that we get. I just love the fresh air. I just love driving around with the roof down. Anyway, this made me think, why don't we do a video today about the best convertibles you can buy for £5,000 or under? We buy a lot of convertibles here in the UK, so on the used market there's plenty of choice. So, let's go shopping. Right, let me fire up Auto Trader. Okay, so we're going to set our maximum price at £5,000. This doesn't sound like a huge amount of money, to be honest, but I promise you it'll buy you a decent convertible. We're going to go on body type convertible. So we've got 3006. Oh, that's nice. Cerulean Blue 93. Found one already here, guys. We'll get onto that later. And then I think we'll leave all the other options open. Where should we start off then? I think we'll start off in... Oh, a Bath. I didn't think you'd get a Bath 500 convertible for that sort of money. They're both write-offs. They're a fun car though, especially the convertible. I don't think I'd recommend you buy a 92,000 mile Cat N. No, forget that. Forget that. Let's have a look at Audi then. So, straight away off the top of my head, we've got the A3 convertible, which I don't really rate, to be honest. They've got that funny boot. The A4 convertible, which is much better, or the A5 convertible, or my personal favourite, the TT. Let's have a look then. So yeah, the A3, let me just quickly show you this. It's kind of subjective this, you might like it, you might like the styling. I've just never been a massive fan. On the bright side, they are very cheap to run, especially if you go for something like this. This is a 1.6 TDI, so the road tax will be either 20 quid or free. I just don't think, I think it looks a little bit too sort of squashed. And the boot for some reason lifts up like a hatch, but it just limits access. It's quite awkward to use the space. They should have, in my opinion, dropped the boot like a tailgate, like they did with the Mini. It's much more practical. So yeah, it depends. If you like it, go for it. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just not a fan of it. So let's forget the A3. But still, I mean, it's good news you can buy one. A 2009 done 96 for 4,200 quid. It's a nice, sensible, modern car, that really. It's probably worth pointing out, actually, the A3 convertible is very similar to the VW Golf convertible that I did a video with recently. I think I'd rather have the Golf, to be honest. Let's look at Audi A4s then. Now, these are good cars. They are getting on a bit in age. That's the only downside. Oh, that's a nice one. So they do one with a 3-litre TDI. Now, I had one of these myself. In fact, I bought it for my mum. She ran it for a few months. And that engine's beautiful. It's got loads of power, loads of torque. I know lots of people these days don't like diesels, but that 3-litre diesel Audi A4 convertible was a particular favourite of mine. You have to watch out for the gearboxes though, because they're not great. You need to make sure that you service them regularly. And the 3-litre diesel, as good as it is, can have timing chain issues. The timing chain's at the back of the engine and it's like a £3 job, which on a £3,700 car would render it a write-off really, wouldn't it? They do some nice colours though in the A4. So look at this, for example. So that's just black, but it comes with a nice red roof. I always quite like a convertible with a red roof or a blue roof. I just think it looks a bit more interesting than black. So the Audi A4, that's not a bad option because of course it's 4 seats. So if you've got a couple of kids, it means that they don't have to stay at home like Macaulay Culkin. They can come with you. The A5 was the successor to the A4, so there might be fewer of these, but they'll be more modern. What have we got here then? What are our options? Personally, I would avoid the petrols because they can burn oil. Audi petrols just never seem to be great, to be honest. As much as diesels aren't popular these days, you're probably better off with a diesel. They're just far more reliable. Let's have a look at this one then, for example. I've taken a nice photograph. Right, that looks nice actually. So that's a 2009, late 2009 Audi A5 S-Line. I can tell it's the S-Line because it's got the S-Line wheels, because I'm a loser. It's got the nice LED lights. They're a very stylish, oh look at that. They're a very stylish looking car. Of course, the interior is a little bit dated now, but for £5,000, you can't really complain, can you? If you go for a 2-litre diesel, you need to make sure it's had the timing belt done, because the 2-litre has a belt, the 3-litre has a chain. And again, same thing with the gearbox. This one's manual, but if you go for an automatic, make sure it's had its gearbox fluid changed. They're not the most thrilling car to drive. It's not like driving a 3 Series BMW, but they're decent enough. They're quite nice cars to live with, really. So that's the A5. We're firing through these, aren't we? S4, I wouldn't advise you go for an S4. They come with a big V8, which sounds beautiful, but they can have loads of issues. I'd advise against that. The TTS, you won't get a good one for 5k, so forget that. What about the TT? Now, this one's a local car as well in Stockport. I love the TT. Really cool car, I think. So that's a 1.8 petrol turbo. It's a 2009 with a nice beige leather interior. The fact that you can get that kind of car for £5,000, I just find really hard to believe. And it's only done 49,000 miles. Oh, we're getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Right, so I think from Audi, if you need 4 seats, you need an Audi A5 convertible. If you don't, if you're young, free and single, then go for a TT. Right. On to, let's go BMW then, I think. BMW. So off the top of my head here, we've got the Z3, the Z4, the 3 Series. You might get a 6 Series, but I couldn't recommend a cheap 6 Series because they can be problematic. Oh, or of course the 1 Series, right? There's one that I forgot. Now the 1 Series it's kind of the same thing as the A3 I said earlier. I'm not a huge fan. They always looked a little bit too small, too awkward looking. Having said that, it's not horrendous, is it, that? Personally, this got nothing to do with the car, but I'd have put my washing in first before I took photographs of the car. The rest of their place looks nice though. That's quite a cool car actually. I take back what I said. 120 diesel, you need to make sure you don't have timing chain issues and stuff because they can be troublesome. I'd probably advise you go for a 6-cylinder, something like a 125. That'd be better. Let's go off that for a second. They're a 4-seater, but there's not an awful lot of space in the back. So I think if you want something for the family, you need a 3 Series really. Now for £5,000 you're going to get a really nice E46, I would have thought, or the new model from 07 onwards. That would be quite cool. So this is that's so much car for the money, you know. That's a 2007 BMW 330D. So it's got that 3-litre straight 6 turbo diesel, which is a cracking engine. It's an automatic. It's done 114,000 miles. That is finished in, is it topaz blue? Look at that interior. That's really nice. £4,000 buys you so much car, you know, in this country. It's got the nicer M Sport wheels. That looks exceptional, actually. Now the later 3 Series has got a folding metal roof as well. The E46 had the fabric top, which I think looks better, but the later metal roof is a little bit easier to live with. There's less wind noise, road noise, nobody's going to vandal damage it, you know, all that sort of stuff. But it will be more expensive to fix if it goes wrong. Something else to point out with this era of 3 Series, especially the convertible, especially if you go for an M Sport, the ride is very firm. I bought one for myself actually, and had it for a day and then realised that I couldn't cope with it. Something to mention actually, I'd always favour going for a 6-cylinder BMW like this one. This is a 3-litre 325, but they can have issues with the injectors and they're quite expensive to replace. You're looking £300 or £400 per injector, and of course there are 6. Saying that, we're now 15 years on, it should have had them replaced by now. Quite a cool car that, although that one's got a little bit of body damage, but still, not bad. I still prefer the E46 to be honest. Ah, right, this is what I'd buy. This is a 2002 E46 330 in Oxford Green. My favourite colour. I had one of these actually once. I never used it and sold it. I have these great ideas. Anyway, oh, that's really cool. I should buy that, you know. Anyway, right, so that's the 2002. It's a 330, so it uses a straight 6 non-turbocharged, naturally aspirated petrol engine. It's a cracking engine. 222 brake horsepower, 232, something like that. Just enough power. Quite a nice interior, although there's a little bit of wear there on the bolster, but that's fairly standard. And the interesting point to mention about the convertible, it's slightly longer than the coupe, so you get a little bit more legroom in the back. Forget the new one then, that's what I'd pick. That is what I would have. Right, again, if you're child-free, or if you've got kids but they just don't want to see you, let's have a look at the Z Series. Oh, I'll tell you what, let me just have a quick look at 6 Series first. I love the 6 Series, but they are... If you go for a 645 with that 4.4 litre naturally aspirated V8, it's a great engine when it works. When it doesn't, you're into massive bills. Of course, you could buy it with a 3 litre straight 6, something like a 630i. That'd do, wouldn't it? It's still somewhat sensible. Lots of people, you know, when these cars came out, didn't like the shape of the convertible top, but I always did. I always thought it was quite quirky and interesting. I think we've got Andy Dufresne in the next office trying to tunnel his way out. It is a good looking car, the 6 Series. I would say then, if you can find a mint 645 with proper history, go for it. But if not, if you want to sort of err on the side of caution, go for a 630. That's really cool. It was a Chris Bangle design, I believe, which wasn't popular at the time, but I always liked it. But then I quite like weird things. Right, let's go on to the Z car range then. So, we've got the Z3, which is a bit old now, but There are 75 Z3s and 112 Z4s. They're a pretty car, the Z3. I recently bought a Z3, a pristine low mileage example from a place in Knutsford, and I've shipped it all the way to Bermuda for a client of mine. So thank you to the 22 people who watched that video, because it wasn't the most popular video I've ever made, but I quite enjoyed it. Yeah, it's a pretty car, that. Especially if you go for a 6-cylinder. So something like that, 2.2 litre, it's a 6-cylinder straight 6. Yeah, nice car. 170 horsepower might not sound like an awful lot, but the car doesn't weigh an awful lot either. So trust me, that will be enough. Now if you go for a 2.8 or a 3 litre, they come with a limited slip diff, so you can have a bit more fun. I can't believe how cheap these cars are, you know. Ah, that was for sale when I was looking. This was another option of mine actually, but it'd done a few more miles and it didn't look as nice. But it's still for sale, which is interesting. I mean, it looks nice, it just doesn't look as nice as the one that I ultimately bought. So, anyway, so yeah, the Z3 is an option. I think that's a classy option, to be honest. The Z4 is much more modern and easier to live with and nicer to drive and all that sort of stuff. But if you want something to use on a Saturday or Sunday that just looks cool, I'd favour the Z3. Let's take a look at the Z4 then. So this one, again, so much car for £5,000. This is a 2007, done 49,000 miles. It's a 2.5 6-cylinder. It's only an SE, but it's got quite nice wheels. Nice wisteria there. That looks really nice, you know. I think they're aging beautifully, you know, the Z4. I think they just look really cool. And the interior is beautiful, look at that. The interior is almost like a Z8, which I think has got one of the nicest interiors of all time. That's one of my dream cars, really, the Z8. Whether I'll ever, even if I could afford it, whether I'll ever spend £200,000 on a left-hand drive only old BM remains to be seen, but anyway. Okay, then where else can we look? Cadillac, no. Chrysler, you don't want a PT Cruiser, do you? Do you? I do, but then I'm odd. Citroën, you don't want one of those. You don't want a Pluriel, do you? Daihatsu, nope, thank you. DS, no. Fiat, you could have a 500. I think the Fiat 500 convertible is quite a pretty car, but as a fun car to use on a Sunday, that wouldn't really fit the bill. The Abarth would, but the regular one wouldn't, with a 1.2, you know, 68 horsepower engine. Wouldn't really cut the mustard, I don't think. So onto Honda then, we've got a CRX Del Sol. One of my neighbours had one of those when I was growing up. I always liked it. It's got one of those T-bar roofs. It's a bit like a Nissan 100NX, that sort of thing. There are only 2 of those. They're an appreciating car, you know, now. Jaguar XK. I wouldn't advise you buy a cheap XK. I think you're into a whole world of pain there with timing chains and all sorts of stuff. They're pretty, but just beware. Beware. Jeep. Can you buy a Wrangler for £5,000? Oh, I really want a Wrangler. I'm amazed that's only £5,000 because they normally double that. Such a cool car, that. It's done 100,000 miles. Is it the 4 litre? Oh, it's a 4 litre. I wonder why that Wrangler's like half the price it should be. That should be an £8,000 car, that. Should we check it out using Car Vertical? Let's have a look. Let's see if there's anything iffy about this car then. Now, I always use Car Vertical, but they're just really easy to use and really thorough. So you just go to carvertical.com, type in the reg or the VIN. Now in this case, it is Sierra 782 November Hotel. Now this checks databases in 35 different countries and it checks hundreds of millions of cars. It'll tell us whether it's been stolen, written off, had a mileage rollback, or has outstanding finance on it. It's not expensive to do, and it's cheaper still if you use my promo code, which is HIGHPEAK. HIGHPEAK, all one word, or alternatively, click the link below in the video description. That promo code will get you 20% off and you can use it as many times as you like. It isn't just a one-time thing. So, it's never been clocked, there's no outstanding finance, there's no recorded damage, and it's never been stolen, which is weird. That's a cheap car, you know that. The mileage is consistent every single year. It's barely done anything, actually. But then saying that, I mean, it's one of those cars that you'd rarely use. They're horrible to drive. They're just... You mistake the sort of poor handling and stuff for fun, that's the thing. It's a bit like driving an old Defender. You end up driving it grinning ear to ear, but, you know, and you can't really work out why. So it's the old 4 litre 6-cylinder. It was manufactured in... I think this is an import there. It is an import. It is an import. It was first registered in the UK in 2002. We've got here country unknown. I think that could be a Japanese import then. Some of these, you know, were imported from the US. They were used by the postal service there because they were right-hand drive. I think it meant that the postal workers in the US didn't have to get out the car to... I think that's what it meant anyway. I've seen quite a few there. Well, that's that. It's all clear. Might make a phone call. Anyway, right. Well, thank you Convertible for sponsoring today's video. Okay then, let's get off Jeep then. Land Rover, you don't want an old Mark 1 Freelander, do you? Lexus, you could buy an SC. I recently had one in stock that sold for £5 grand, so I know you can get a decent one for £5 grand. Mine was quite a nice one actually. They're an old 4.3 litre V8. They have a timing belt, but apart from that, they never really go wrong. They're not the most thrilling to drive. It's a bit like driving it's like driving a Lexus LS, but you know, with a bit more wind in your hair. That's a nice one, but of course it's over budget. So that one's done 188. That one's red. Don't really like it in red, to be honest. It looks a bit cheap, doesn't it? I do like the SC though, particularly from the back. I think it just looks cool with its twin exhausts. The only downside, or one of the downsides with this, apart from it not being a particularly thrilling drive, seats are comfortable though. There's not an awful lot of room in the back, and with that 4.3 litre V8, you'll be looking at 16, 17 miles per gallon. So they are a bit thirsty. Still, as a Saturday or Sunday car, wouldn't be the end of the world, would it? Right, let's move on then. Lotus, no. Mazda, MX-5. Now straight away, I mean, as soon as you mention, the Unos is the Japanese import, by the way. As soon as you mention a cheap convertible, just for a bit of fun, you can't not look at an MX-5, really. It's just one of those cars that does everything it says on the tin. It's that kind of thing, like a Ron Seal car. So that's a 2009 Mazda MX-5, done 76. That's not far away, it's only an Oldham, for 4,200 quid. I mean, they don't look, it's pretty enough, isn't it? It's not like one of those cars that you stop and gawp at, but it's pretty enough with its twin exhausts. The interior is sort of functional, it's a little bit plasticky in places, but wait till you drive them, they're just great fun. You get a little short gear lever and short shifts, it's rear wheel drive, there's sort of enough power to have some fun in it. They're just a good car, really. Watch out for rust though, because they can rot terribly. So £5,000 will get you a very decent MX-5. Mercedes then. So you've got the SLK, the CLK, the E-Class, maybe an SL, but don't know if I'd recommend a £5 SL, to be honest. CLK then, let's have a look here. Something like that would be good, you know. That's only in Macclesfield as well. That's a 2008 57. It's only had 5 owners, which isn't bad in its 16 years. It's only done 84,000 miles, and it's a CLK 280 Sport Cabriolet. So it uses a 3 litre V6 petrol. And that's a pretty good engine, actually. I've had a few of these. Now, I think this era of CLK, the Mark II, is aging beautifully. It's a pretty car, that. I think the Mark I is a bit of an ugly duckling. I can't see that ever being that desirable, to be honest. That's the one with the stick-up badge and the split headlamps. Yeah, they're not the prettiest things. But the Mark II, I think, is a really nice car. And the same goes with the interior. Again, the Mark I CLK, the interior is just sort of old Mercedes from the 90s. But the Mark II looks tasteful. Oh, look at this one. This one's got a red interior. It's a Cat N, though, but I don't know whether that would put you off. This is a 350, so it's got a 3.5 litre V6 with, I think, 272 horsepower, I think. I'm a sucker for a red interior. I just think it looks really cool. That's really nice. In obsidian black. Yes, I know the colour code. That's nice. Cat N or no Cat N. So £5 will get you a decent one of those, and there's plenty of room in the back for your kids or whatever. Decent sized boots. That's not a bad option, you know. You know, that one being a Cat N, it might be worth a look at because the Cat N means non-structural. Had it been a Cat S, that would mean that it had a structural, structural damage. So that might be one to avoid. But Cat N could have just had a little sort of prang in a supermarket and it's been written off because it needed a new bumper, front or rear or something. That wouldn't necessarily put me off, especially for that sort of money. I don't think you can be too choosy, really. So we've got the E-Class Convertible, which I don't think looks half as good as the CLK, to be honest. But it's a little bit more modern, therefore easier to live with. And there's a whole host of engines to choose from. So if you're on a tight budget, you could go for something like an E220, which uses that old 2.1 litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel, which is a bit rough and ready, but very reliable. So that's an option. Like I say, I just can't see that aging as well as the CLK. It's not a bad looking car, but the CLK is pretty, and that isn't pretty. Maybe that's a bit harsh. Looks all right, actually. Get a nicer interior. That's a cool car, you know, for that sort of money. Okay, then. So we've got an SL. We've got 17 SLs to choose from for £5. Now, I know firsthand how expensive these cars can be when they break. I have an old SL55, which, to be fair, is never broken, but it is quite costly. And they're complex. They've got like ABC suspension and stuff, so I'd steer clear of those. If you're adamant you want one, though, go for a 350. there's less to go wrong. I don't think the 350s have the ABC suspension, or if they do, it was an option. The 500 onwards has the ABC. So yeah, go for a 350, I would say. Something like that I would avoid. 8 owners, part service history, that's just like red flag, red flag. That's been painted, another red flag, forget that. SLK, right, that's a cool car, you know. So that's an SLK 350, so it's got a decent sized engine. A lot of these have got a little compressor engine, which is a little bit wet, but the 350 is a proper V6. They look cool, don't they? Got that F1 style front grille, like the SLR. Cool car. That one's a nice spec as well. But this one, I think, has got the wind scarf thing, or neck scarf, whatever you call it. So it blows warm air at the back of your neck, which is quite a nice feature. There you go. You can just see it there. So it blows nice warm air at the back of your neck. I'm amazed that you can buy that 272 brake horsepower little sports car for $3,995. That's with a dealer's margin on as well. Cars are cheap here, aren't they? Right, SLK, nope. Let's change brand then. MG, would you like, here's a serious question, would you like a car with head gasket failure? So let's look at the TF then. They're pretty cars, the TF. I've always liked the way they look, but if you go for the 1.8, they have head gasket failure. They're just not great cars. It's typical Rover, really. You get in it and straight away you think this has been built by somebody who didn't like his job, and they've assembled this probably in the dark with no enthusiasm. They're just naff. Unless you like tinkering around with cars yourself, forget it. But no, they are a pretty car. It's just a shame they weren't built properly. Mini, you could have a Mini convertible. I don't like them, to be honest, so I think we'll get off this, but they're not bad cars, I suppose. Mitsubishi, would you like a Colt? No thanks, I would not like a Colt. Let's get off those. Nissan. What did Nissan do? Oh, the Figaro, that's quite a cool car, isn't it, the Figaro? $4,500. Now, these were only you might correct me if I'm wrong now, they were only made for the Japanese market, and they only made something like 2,000 of them. The numbers were really small, and a lot of them have ended up here being imported because it looks like a much older car than it actually is. Underneath, you've got an old, what era of Micra is it? Not is it a K9 Micra? I'm not sure. It's an old 1 litre Micra underneath, basically, but with a cool shell. And they are a cool car, actually, but they're very old now, and possibly difficult to get parts for. Quite a few Figaros there. Nissan Micra CC there in pink, if that's your thing. Oh, a 350Z. I didn't think you could get those for $5,000. Wow, this one's an eyeful. Wait till you see this. Oh dear. Right. If anyone fancies a project, there's one there in, was it in Rotherham or somewhere? Oh, Western Supermare. Right. That needs some attention, that. Okay, let's get off Nissan then. There's nothing there for me to see. Opel Peugeot, you don't want a 206, 207cc or a 307 or a 308cc. You don't want one of those. Porsche, can you buy a decent Boxster? Yes, you can. I love the Boxster, to be honest. I always say this, but I just think it's all the Porsche you need. You can't really use a 911 on the roads. You just can't. You can't exploit it, really. So something like a 986 Boxster 2.7 or the 3.2S, they're really good cars. Of course, they're getting on in age now a little bit, so just be wary, especially if you buy a Tiptronic, because the gearboxes can be troublesome. But yeah, $5,000 will get you one. I'd advise you go for a manual and probably a facelift. So avoid the early 2.5s, I would say. Go for a 2.7. There you go. Look out for full service history. Make sure it's had its IMS bearing changed. Renault. We've got the Wind. I quite like the Renault Wind. Whether you'd want one or not, I'm not sure, but I always quite like them. The Megane CC, you can't realistically have one of those, can you? Renault 19, look at that. They were quite desirable in the day, believe it or not. A Rover 200 Cabriolet, look at this. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember those, and they were quite cool. Or when I was a kid, I thought they were quite cool, but then I didn't really know any better. Now let's get off that because it's making me feel sick. Next. Saab. Now, let's find this cerulean little beauty. That is such a pretty car, I think. That's the best colour. One of the best colours of any car, in my opinion. So that's a 2006 Saab 9.3 Cerulean. It's automatic, and it's low mileage. So all that car for less than £5,000 I just think is a bargain. 2 litre turbo, so I think it's about 200 horsepower, is it? 180 or something like that. They're cool cars. Really comfortable, the seats are the best. And for £5,000 you can pretty much buy any one you want. There are dozens on there for sale. And I think now Saab have been bust for 15 years or something. They will start to go up in value, I'm sure of it. Smart Roadster, you don't want one of those really. Suzuki. What Suzukis have we got? Ah, Vitara or the Jimny. There's another car that was really desirable when I was a kid. So they did this is the old shape Vitara. They did a limited edition called something like a Fat Boy or something with wide arches. And as a kid, I always fancied one. Anyway, I don't think that's not really my idea of a fun Sunday car, to be honest. So we'll get off Suzuki. Toyota, what have we got? The MR2 perhaps? They're decent cars, you know, the MR2. Did a video with one last year. Don't think they're the prettiest cars, to be honest. But I do quite like them with the red roof and red interior. You can see a theme here, can't you? They're dead reliable, the engines are chain driven, they never go wrong. It's not a bad option really. You're better off with an MX-5. An MX-5 drives better. Just depends if you want to be different and unique. Then we can go down to Vauxhall. So we've got the Tigra, which you don't want. The Astra hardtop, which you don't want. Or is it the Cascade or the Cascada or something? I've never had one, thankfully. Cascada. Wasn't she a singer in the late 2000s? Was that Cascada? So this basically, I think, is an Astra convertible. And it isn't a bad looking car, to be honest, is it? But that will be the most dreary thing in the world to drive. No, forget that. Forget that. Life's too short. Let's move on to Volkswagen then. You don't want an EOS. Definitely not, because they leak and they're just a nightmare. What else don't you want from VW? You don't want a Beetle. I don't like those. The Golf convertible. That's not bad. So something like that. You've got a proper fabric roof. It's less fussy, less fiddly, less complicated. That isn't a bad looking car, is it? Like I say, it's the same as the Audi A3 really, but you get a bit more space with this. I think they're slightly cheaper than the Audi as well, so you get more car for your money. Again, if you go for a diesel, which you're better off, oh that's cool. If you go for a diesel, you're better off with a diesel, but make sure it's had its cam belt done. I'm surprised you can buy that for that sort of money. We've got a Mark I Golf GTI Cabriolet here, 1986, done 110. That's a cool car, that. For 5,995. I mean, it'll be atrocious to drive, won't it, obviously, but it is cool, that. Looks a bit ropey, doesn't it? Needs a new hood. It's all sort of peeled, doesn't it? Okay, you don't, unless you want to buy a project, forget that. And forget the EOS. I have nightmares about VW EOSs. Ah, Volvo, right. The C70 is a cracking car. So you want the early ones. I don't really rate the Mark I, but the Mark II with the folding metal roof, they're really good cars, especially if you go for a D5 or, well, a T5 really. The only downside with the T5 is they're in the high tax band, so you'll pay £700 a year to tax it. The gearboxes can have issues, so you need to make sure you get them serviced every sort of 80,000 miles. But take a look at this. So that's 4975 in Darlington. It's a 2007. It's a C70 D5 SE Geartronic, so it's automatic. Now, I always really rated these. They're a good looking car, they're quite handsome. You get twin exhausts. It just looks nicely sort of balanced. And the interiors are lovely as well. I think they've aged well. Yeah, that's not a bad car. And that 2.4 litre D5 well, it's quite torquey anyway, and you'll still get, 30 odd miles per gallon. So they're quite sensible to run. Personally, like I say, I'd go for the T5, but that's just me. So there's a T5, for example. Now the T5 is properly quick. It's a little rapid car, that. That's a manual. I think I'd go for an auto personally. But yeah, look at that interior. It's really nice. You get this sort of floating centre console here, which I always thought was quite a nice feature. It's only done 70,000 miles. That's really good, But yeah, 220 horsepower, you will pay high road tax. But, you can't have it always, can you? That's the Mark I was talking about, which is an ugly bus, isn't it, I think? Look at the state of that interior. It's just old 90s Volvo, isn't it? That's why you're better off with the Mark II. Well, I think that's about it then. We've exhausted the alphabet on Auto Trader, which is my favourite hobby and pastime. Let me try and give you my 5 picks then. My top 5 picks. Okay, right. Let me have a quick scan through then. Now these are in no particular order, but we've got the Mazda MX-5. You need to go and look at one of those. If you only want a 2-seater, go and look at one of those. If you want a 4-seater, then you need to go and look at an Audi A5 or a BMW 3 Series. Out of those two, I think I'd pick the BMW, to be honest. Yeah, I would. I know I would. If you want a nice 4-seater that I think will appreciate in value, something that's pretty, you need a CLK, but the Mark II, not the Mark I, the Mark II. That's number 3. 2 more then of my top 5 picks. One would be the Porsche Boxster, because I just think I love those cars. You can't really go wrong with one of those. And the last one on my list, if you want something a bit weird, if you can beat me to it before I finish this video, is that Jeep that's in Kings Lynn, which I just think's a bargain for 5 grand. So there we go. That's my top 5 picks for cheap convertibles. So thank you once again for watching. Make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done already. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and TikTok. I'll leave the links below. And yeah, cheers guys. See you next time.